Hi, everyone. Fran here. What happens when the system that's supposed to protect children fails? The guest I have this week is Allison Jeanette Briggs. She is a trauma therapist and author, and when the system failed her, she made it her life's purpose to help children and found out it was only in private practice using somatic healing techniques that she could help the adult victim of childhood trauma. Welcome to the Hopenning. I hope you stay with me. Welcome to the Hopenning. This is a place where hope is happening, and it's a joy and a privilege to have Allison Jeanette Briggs with me today. Welcome, Allison.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, so you are a trauma therapist, a writer, and the founder of Being Real, PLLC. If I were to ask your closest high school friend, what would she or he have said about Allison at high school?
That's a good question. It's hard for me to say. I think she would say that I was probably pretty bright and bubbly, I think, and probably a little different. Probably a little bit random, and so I still remember one friend saying, you say the most random things, like we'll just be all of a sudden you'll look off and be like, what if an elephant came in here right now, and what would we do if so I think that I was always very curious and loved possibility and imagination, and it was a huge source of coping skill for me as a kid, holding on to hope and having an imagination. And I would escape into that world a lot of times to kind of get away from what was happening in my life. So probably a little over idealistic and rose colored, a little, I wanted to see the world that way, I think, because it felt very safe.
So you talk about rose-colored glasses because of something else that was going on in your life. Can you touch on that just a bit? Because those of us that get into this healing profession, I was first
Mhm.
a teacher and then I moved into hypnotherapy. There's a reason. It doesn't
Sure.
just,
Yeah.
we could have become lawyers or doctors. We could have become anything. Your friends would have described you as being very bright, but you chose to become a teacher and then a counselor, school counselor, and then after that, a trauma therapist. What carried you into this profession?
I'm a Gen X kid, and we were raised on, Pop Tarts and Flintstone vitamins and watching like that big boxed like TV that was on the ground with like MTV videos that raised us and movies. And so that's what I want to say from 4 to 6 years old, the hardest period of my life. That's what I clung to. I clung to like movies and fantasy. And, I remember watching probably movies I shouldn't have been watching at that age, but I remember watching Mommy Dearest. And I remember thinking it echoed so much of what was happening to me in real time in the house I was in. And then seeing the little girl grow up and writing about it. She was like, I'm going to let everyone know the truth one day. And I remember thinking in my head, I think it was later being in my bedroom, I'm like, I'm gonna write a book about this. And I mean, I was very little to have thought that. And I think it just kind of swirled in the background. I had all these other dreams, like I want to be a dancer, a singer, I want to be an actress. I want to like all those kinds of things because I loved performing. But I was like, okay, I probably need to be a little bit more practical. When I was 18, I ended up taking it was my senior year, and you have those extra electives you can take, And so I was like, I'm curious about psychology and sociology because my mom had always had a little bit of an interest. And so I remember being in that class and being one of the most vocal students in the class, asking questions, curious. Like that felt like a place that I was like, oh, that I belong here, And so I also didn't have confidence in my own intelligence, and my capability, because I mean, I moved 14 times growing up. And so I was just trying to stay afloat. So my expectations for myself were low going into college. I went to community college and I didn't have the support of anyone. I was like thinking in my head, what's the job I can get that I won't, and this sounds cynical, but it was that I won't get fired from. And the reason was because my mom could never keep a job. And I wanted to make sure I had security. It's the truth, you know? And so I was like, well, I like kids, like, you know, that would be kind of cool. And so I went that route. But in my mind, it was always from 18 on, I thought I'm going to somehow be a child therapist and I'm going to figure out an indirect way to get there. So it was always in my head. I wanted to work with the kids that didn't have access, you know, the parents that weren't going to send them to a therapist. So it kind of worked out because I was in the school system for 19 years and I was a school counselor for 9 years. And, you know, the only reason I finally decided to leave is because I was really so sick of the institution, the system, the constraints, the demands that were just checklists. They weren't meaningful. They weren't caring in a lot of ways. It was very fear-based. And I didn't know that the turn that I would take would be working with adults when I got into private practice. I initially started with saying, I'm going to work with kids, their parents. And that was a whole other thing in private practice versus when I was in school. It was, I noticed when I started seeing the kids, I did have a couple of encounters where I was like, I can't do this because it was really hitting on things for me from childhood around systems and institutions and protection and how the law works and the lack of protection for kids. Being part of that and seeing how little I could protect a kid, I could do that more in a school than I could in private practice. I mean, I guess, or maybe it was just the illusion that I could do more in a school. But I had a, you know, particular incident and I had to make CPS reports all the time. I had to do that, you know, and it's never fun. But one particular situation was very, very triggering, and it was triggering all my childhood stuff. And after that, I was like, okay, I think I need to change the lanes because it is too deeply triggering. Even if I got consultation, I said, I can't do this. I can't do it. And it was really hard because I had a sense of strong loyalty to, I think, the little kid in me. Because a CPS report was made on me. No one did anything. Teacher didn't do anything. The system didn't do anything. No one cared. They didn't do anything. It was a checklist. So I learned probably at 5 or 6, these adults aren't going to look out for me. That's the lesson that I learned. And I think that I was doing some trauma reenactment a little bit when I was a school counselor because there was a strong protection, like a fierce protection and a sense of like, I will fight everyone to hurt this kid. And a lot of times the pattern I continued to see was it's so easy to dismiss the convenient person, the kid that their parents aren't going to say anything, the quiet kid, and they end up getting re-victimized. It was repeatedly, I would say, well, they came and said this and this and this. And then the response would always be back, well, do you know what they did? Every single time. Didn't matter if there was an imbalance of power. Somehow it fell on them still because they didn't want to do anything. They didn't want to take action. And it's sad to say that. Then I don't think that it's conscious. I don't think people do that consciously. I think they tell themselves things to feel okay about it. I started getting more entrenched in it, I think, in the sense of, well, I'm going to just fight harder. I'm going to double down more. I'm going to, you know, and so that's when I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm one person in the system. What I can do is I can work with the adults that are now grown up that experienced it. And so I kind of shifted, and it was like a slow shift, you know, so it's still something that's really disappointing when I look at the system and how kids are not protected. Kids are not, they're just not. They're not protected by the family law system. They're not protected by the education system. They're not protected by CPS. But people have checklists so that they can say they did this, this, and this. And in fairness, the problem isn't with them. The problem is systemic. When you have people who are overloaded and under-resourced, you're setting them up to just unintentionally harm. I felt more empowered helping the adult women who have been through things like that.
So let's back up a bit, Allison. So you got into education because you wanted the stability for yourself, for perhaps the child in you and
Yes.
your own children that you didn't have as a child growing up. You moved 14 times. In my mind, I'm thinking 14 times. You must have moved at least once a year. But
More than that. Yeah.
more than that. But okay, so I'm going to ask you this. What was the cause of so many moving? Because your mom kept on losing her job, or was there something, because your mom was once a child too. She was once a child raised
Yes.
by someone else. So, like what you're saying now, that you're working with women, we continue the pattern that we were raised in.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yes.
what
Yes.
was this pattern that had been happening
Yeah.
throughout? It must have been at least two generations.
No,
Your mother, or maybe the mom or the father before. So,
that's such a good question. And yes, I had a real fixation on trying to understand what made my mom and what made her mom and her mom's mom. And I would ask questions all the time growing up because I was trying to make sense of it all the time. But my mom had, bipolar, and I think she had a lot of bipolar episodes with psychosis. She later was diagnosed, she's still alive, but with schizophrenia. But typically people don't get diagnosed later in life. I think she just went through a very long period of psychosis. And so she was just mentally not stable. So there was a lot of relationship issues. There were dynamics with my dad. He was, I'm pretty sure, and I know everyone says it, but I think he was narcissistic. I don't know for sure. Maybe he was just a very emotionally unavailable and hurt man. But he was a drug dealer. He was very charming. He dropped out of college. They met at like a nightclub in Houston. They were both, I think it was very kind of volatile and impulsive and unpredictable. And they had this on and off again relationship, got married. And he did become physically abusive. A couple times he was physically abusive with me. Eventually, she later told me, because we had many, many conversations around this, because I said, why would you leave me for 2 years and not come get me? Because I was, from 4 to 6 years old, I was just, they would kidnap me back and forth. I don't want to normalize it or say it's universal, but I do think that it does speak to something about that generation, about Gen Xers. I know that it didn't just happen to me. There were a lot of people, I think, coming out of this. My mom came from a Church of Christ, very conformed, push it all down. It looks good on the outside. It looked like a pretty white picket fence family. But there was oppression in that house. There was massive systemic oppression, gender oppression. And I think that what happens is that then you turn inward. You stop trusting your intuition. You start to become, I remember my mom telling me when she was about 4 years old that she told her mom, I think she was highly intuitive. She was the black sheep in the family, because the black sheep is the one that is saying what's happening. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Well, what's going to happen? You're going to go crazy. You're going to be like, well, my reality is not, I can't trust my reality. And she told me when she was about 4, she looked around, she's like, something's not right here. Something is not right. And she even told her mom, and her mom's like, what are you talking about? Everything's fine. So to be in a situation where you can feel it and you even see it, and people are saying it's not happening, that is massive gaslighting. And it's so incredibly harmful. And I think that the rest of my life, and not to say that there isn't a genetic predisposition for sure. But then my question becomes, is the genetic predisposition for people who are highly sensitive? Are we looking at mental health through the right frame? Is the problem the person or the system the person is in that creates the conditions? Gabor Mate talks about this in his book, The Myth of Normal. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before.
Love Gabor Mate.
I think that the conditions were ripe for her to have some kind of mental health issue. And I think the conditions were ripe for my dad to become who he was. And there was the spiritual awakening or whatever, the 60s and 70s, and love and peace. And, we're like family unit, screw that. Like, we're going to do what feels good, not what looks good. There's another book that helped me kind of understand that. It's called The Fourth Turning. That's another really good book. It talks about generational theory. So it's really helped me kind of understand it, not just personally, but universally. So I really believe that those things I think kids were getting kidnapped. It's like, okay, well, we're just going to not talk, we're just going to take you. If you go back and look at even the movies in the 80s, the things that were happening then, it kind of mirrors what was happening.
I can see that a little girl who, like yourself, who's not able to grow any roots at all. You don't know what's going to be happening later on today when you get home from school. You don't know what's going to be happening tomorrow, even if you just don't understand. And trying to figure out what's going on, and then something happens, whether you're taken away from your mom for 2 years, or then she finally finds you and gets you back, so everything that you thought was stable over here for 2 years is no longer. So you're continually learning to pivot and read the crowd. And so did your own intuition get heightened because of these experiences in childhood? It was so unsettling. I mean, just kind of standing on quicksand. Did you get a better sense of being able to read people, maybe read what was going to happen next, and be more protective of yourself?
I think it's I've done a lot of research on this to try to just understand myself, because that neurodivergence can happen neurologically, but I think it can also happen environmentally. Your brain becomes kind of neurodivergent when you're in an environment that's not, you're going to adapt to that. And then you're going to start seeing things in a way other people don't see them. I'm never going to know for sure. I suspect it's a combination of being sensitive already, and then on top of that happening, because I don't think everyone would have. I think we all have different coping skills in a situation like that. The unique coping skills I developed were because of my sensitivity. And so I look at other people, and the coping skill they have is addiction. It's alcohol. It's rage. It is so much shame that I start developing those narcissistic traits. I tended to fall on the codependency part of all of that stuff. And so I think that people who become codependent, it's adaptive, but I do think that they already have some kind of predisposition of sensitivity that was going to push them in that direction in an unhealthy environment. So they're the ones that are more sensitive. So they're like, okay, what keeps me safe? And so I got super attuned and hypervigilant. And the hypervigilance, I think, when we look at people who have complex PTSD, sometimes I think that the way we describe them is I think it's getting better, but it implies brokenness and defectiveness versus a different kind of advantage, especially when it's been healed. It becomes a superpower when it's been healed. Not to say that I don't still go to the hypervigilance sometimes, and I can spin, and then I'm like, okay, because it's a tool that rebuilding those neural pathways, it takes time, but I'm very aware of that. There's that looping, like trying to plan 5 years in advance. Like, this is ridiculous. Now, sometimes it's until death. I remember one time in my head going, okay, I got to plan my retirement. So how long will I live? So hopefully I don't live beyond this, because this is I'm like, this is a really dark thought process, you know? Um, so, but I will say this, I think that a big coping skill for me, and I think it's been an amazing coping skill, is humor. It's humor. It has helped me significantly, not as a way to deflect, but as a way to regulate it and face the darkness with light. It helps me pendulate and kind of go, okay, this is easier to digest when I can see the humor in it, the absurdity, and not take it seriously, not dismiss it, but hold it a little bit lighter,
So you talk about being real. So
Uh-huh.
how does, and that's all, Brene Brown, power of vulnerability. So how does vulnerability and being real play into healing? And one would think, well, I can't tell people that I moved 14 times when I was a kid because I can't let this secret out about the craziness in my childhood. I can't tell anybody that because for whatever reason, it might come back on me. It might bite me in the butt.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
yet, right now, you're telling me this, but you're also telling all of our viewers this. So, where is the power in the power of vulnerability and being real? Why is it powerful?
Honestly, for me personally, I can't speak for anyone else. When I started return to therapy in a very committed way in 2018, when I went into private practice and I was like, I need to get my shit together 100%. I am working with other people in a very deep way, and I really need to work through my stuff. Like, I need to be super hardcore. And I mean, from 2018, I still am in therapy, but I was doing all the research I could. I was doing everything, all the body based stuff. I started, you know what I'm saying? I was digesting everything, but I was also doing it in a very experiential way, not just using mind all the time. It was very experiential and body based. But I can remember in 2018, when I went to my first EMDR therapist and I said, I just want freedom. I don't want to feel trapped anymore. I'm so tired of everything I'm carrying. I just don't want to anymore. And then came 7 years of that prayer coming true. Be careful what you pray for. Because do you really want freedom? Because do you know what freedom costs? Freedom costs everything. You have to be okay losing every single thing. You have to be okay with being homeless. You have to be okay. I mean, I'm telling you, my mind went to every place possible for 7 years and I played it out to the very end. And I'm like, I just want freedom. I just want freedom. I don't even care anymore. Now, it wasn't like in one moment, it was like saying, I can't carry this anymore. I can't carry a certain image. People are going to perceive you how they see you. How they see you is 100% about them. And you can't control that. And I know everyone kind of says these kinds of things, but I don't think a lot of people believe it in their heart and their gut. I think they believe it intellectually, but not in their heart and their gut. But I will tell you, as I've done brain spotting and I've gotten to know me very deeply, I understand why I do what I do. I understand my darkest stuff, why that dark stuff is there. And I've gone through and I'll keep going. I'm not saying I've arrived in any way. I know there's more layers, but because I've faced those things and I've seen my selfish tendencies and where I can manipulate, where I can be jealous, where I can have all that stuff. And then I said, and I love all of it, every single part, because I know what it took and why. And because of that, I can see it clearly in others now. When they're doing it, I'm like, oh, I know what that is. So when they're projecting onto me now, I'm like, I can't help that, but I know what you're doing. It doesn't mean I'm a mind reader and it doesn't mean I don't make assumptions. I still check assumptions. But when you see a pattern, right? Like it's not necessarily words or actions, it's a pattern over time that's like, okay, this person keeps kind of showing up and having a certain impression of you, and it's not aligning with your intention, no matter how you're attempting to convey it. this isn't about me. This is something else, you know? And so like even the act of coming on a podcast, the act of writing now, I've thought these things through already. Like these aren't impulsive acts. I've had to really think, am I okay with fully putting myself out there and the risk that comes with that? Well, do you want freedom? Hell yes. I do not want someone else dictating my life any longer because life is short. None of us know when we're going to die. So I want to enjoy my life. And here's the thing, when I own every part of me, I know who I am. The dark, the light, no one can ever own me again. I'm free because of that.
You mentioned body-based therapy
Mhm.
and the freedom of feeling these feelings and
Mhm.
working through these feelings and then recognizing, oh, I'm being manipulative here. Oh, I'm being jealous. Oh, I'm triggered. I am triggered here. I wonder what that is inside me.
Mhm.
So let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit about some of these techniques that you're so familiar with that you use in your practice. So let's talk about EMDR a little bit.
So it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and the lady who created it kind of it happened by complete accident. Like she was hiking or something. I think it was in the 90s. Or her name was Francine Shapiro. She passed a few years ago, but she was on a hike and she was thinking about something distressing. And as she's on this hike and she's walking, she started moving her eyes back and forth as she was thinking about this thing, and she noticed the distress went down, and she clearly had some self-awareness of her own internal process in the moment to pause and go, wait, what just happened? Like, what was it, because I moved my eyes like that? So she actually started practicing with colleagues, like bring up a distressing event, and then she would practice the eye movement, with them. And so it started out being called EMDR because it started with eye movement, but it's just a form of what's called bilateral stimulation. The left and right hemisphere, the crossing between the two, is doing something or potentially helping even pendulate, like taxing the working memory, because it gets too tired to focus on the intensity of that thing, and that thing becomes a little more distant. And because it becomes more distant, the person has more perspective, and they can then file it back into long-term memory where it was meant to be filed 15 or 20 years ago. So it can be tapping. It can be, some people use a bar and they go back and forth. Some people use these buzzers. I got trained and certified in it back in 2020, and I used it pretty religiously from 2018 until 2022. And I work with a lot of people who have complex trauma. They have developmental trauma. And if you look, even Bessel van der Kolk in the book, The Body Keeps the Score, also says the level of efficacy for it starts to decrease the more complexity there is around trauma. And I think I don't know, I don't want to misquote because sometimes I make mistakes on things like that. So, but I venture to say it's like 30 to 40% effectiveness, which is pretty low for complex trauma. So that's why, like, you see a lot of EMDR therapists who go and get trained in like parts work. They go and get trained in additional modalities and start weaving those things in because most people have complex trauma. So it's hard for me to say, is it EMDR or the fact that it was a protocol that was created that could kind of name something, say what was happening, and then these other modalities came in to buffer it. So it's made EMDR, no offense to EMDR, but more glorified than it is. Because the reason I say that is because it always takes people, people are still talking about CBT. It takes mainstream time to catch up to the newest things that are happening. And sometimes it never catches up because clinical trials aren't done. It doesn't mean that there isn't strong validity around that type of therapy. I think David Grand followed the client. And so he was doing, I think it was called Gentle Flow EMDR. And it was his own protocol he had created because there's so many different EMDR protocols. And he was slowly like moving his fingers back and forth with this ice skater he had been working with. And The ice skater, I think they'd been working together for a year, and they'd worked through a lot of family and childhood trauma, but she still couldn't do certain ice skating moves like the triple axel. And one day he did the gentle flow with her, and he was going really slow, but he wove in his somatic background, right? So weaving in those other things, he wove in that somatic background, and he was really focused on what was, I guess, happening with her body. Her eyes stopped and just started wobbling in place. But instead of him saying, we got to stick to the rules, he followed her. He trusted her body. And he stopped. He didn't know why. He just said, I'm not moving. Like, I'm just going to stay right here. Something's happening. I don't know what, but let's just see what happens. And so he calls a big part of what he's done the uncertainty principle, surrendering to uncertainty, to it is very intuitive, following your intuition, following the client. The client knows, and if, what is it, in the jungle or something like that, the antidote is always near the poison. I think it's the same with us. We're a part of nature. We have that poison inside of us, but we also have the antidote, but we have to be trusted to get there. And, his clients started having all these memories that they had already worked on in EMDR come up again, but they were rapid fire, not one, a lot of them. And then some they didn't even think were trauma were coming up. But it was ice skating accidents. Seems obvious, but they had never even thought to work on some of these just like random falls. And it was like at a more deep, visceral level in her body, I think. I think she called the next day and said she did the triple axel. And so he started doing it with more of his clients. And those clients, a lot of them happen to be therapists. And those therapists went and did it with their clients. And they were coming back saying, this is a thing. I don't know what it is. But one of the things he says is he's done all kinds of techniques, and different techniques work with different people, but there's never been one technique that seems to work with everyone. And he said that one, seems to work. And there is research. It's about 3 years old. This was when I was going down the rabbit hole of what is the most effective form of treatment for kids who are survivors of abuse, because we've really failed that population in the mental health system. When I say we failed them, what I mean is when you're using things like CBT and you're glorifying it as the gold standard, and then you're teaching these people to then go do it, and it is the gold standard, and then they go do it, and then these therapists have not worked through their own stuff, that client walks away, if it doesn't work, feeling like, yep, they are defective. So we've harmed them. We've harmed them without even realizing it. And I add the part about a therapist because I've heard it like indirectly, but it's like, I think that what happens is we can get attached to something and then it becomes part of our identity. And then the nervous system communicates, if this isn't working, then you're the problem. And it's usually the therapist's shame that they feel incompetent and they need to work through their issues. And I can say all of this because I have clients coming to me and telling me these things. Clients who are survivors of abuse, who said nothing else works. They just think they're permanently damaged. And it's like, no one listened to your intuition. No one followed you, and they should have the whole time. And Brainspotting allows that. So the
Brainspotting is...
Yes. So the theory is that where you look impacts how you feel. And David Grand just followed that girl. She looked in a certain place. Her eyes started wobbling. He's like, something is happening with her body. I don't know what, but we're going to stop right here. He continued to iterate that with different people. So he would, follow their body state and stop where he noticed tension. He noticed shaking, yawning. But then the clients started actually guiding him. He would stop in a place and they'd go, no, a little to the left. And he was like, oh, okay. Like clearly they knew something. And so he followed them. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You can do, there's inside the window, outside the window. Inside the window is when the client is guiding it and feeling where they feel it the most. Outside the window is when you're paying attention as a therapist and seeing where they feel it based on their body language. Gaze spotting, we do it all the time. Everyone is doing it all the time when you stare in outer space. This isn't something new. It's been around forever. We just forgot. Does that make sense? Like, we forgot to pay attention to ourselves.
You talked about a series that you have on YouTube called After the Awakening series, and it's multiple short videos that you have on your YouTube channel. Does that all play into this collective awakening
I think
of
so.
figuring out like what I am feeling right now? And I know that many of my clients who come in once under hypnotic state, they will feel something within their body. So it could be in their neck. If they have a hard time expressing themselves, they feel as though there's something in their neck. If they have a relationship issue, it's in their chest. One time I had a girl, she felt an inability to move on. She felt it in her hip. What happened to us that we became so disjointed, the head from the rest of the body? Indigenous people for eons believed in the mind, body, spirit. Emotion. Everyone was one with the environment, with each other, with the plants, with the animals. And that was just this collective understanding and being and doing. What happened to make it so separate, so divided from everything else?
It did. I think it also, well, I think it's hard to say the starting point. I think there were multiple starting points that just over time, like reinforced it. But I mean, because I mean, I think we can go all the way back to cavemen. Like there's a book, it's called Sapiens,
I've heard of it. Yeah.
A Brief History of Mankind. That I loved that book. He talks about how we have shared myths that have helped us learn to work in big, like if you look at any clan, right, a community of like monkeys, they can't live beyond 150 without it getting chaotic. Because in a group of 150, there's like a hierarchy of some kind. There's like the shaman, or there's the wise monkey, there's the whatever. But if you get beyond that, it gets to be too chaotic. So how did humans start to live beyond 150? Their imagination. They started creating myths. They had collective shared myths. But I think that what started to also happen is we traded our freedom for safety. And I think that happened slowly over time. You can look at it in literature, or like in the Bible, or where it's like, no, we need a king. We need someone to take care of us. We need someone to tell us how to live. And I think that these, more collectivistic, indigenous cultures, they were going a different path, right? But I think there were some, and I think some of it's like, I don't know why certain cultures developed in a collectivistic way. I think this is my random part that I'm going to throw out there, but I think it's weather. I think it comes down to just the weather, because if you look at like Nordic and Viking, like you're in the snow, you have to become self-sufficient and independent. You're seeing a lot of death. You have to learn to accept death, but then it was about conquering. It was about colonization, and it was about like, what can I do to feel some power? And so I think that spread out everywhere. And if you think about it, it makes sense for it to spread out, because if you are living in a really cold area, you do become brave. The people that are still alive, they've learned to face that harsh stuff and like almost numb to it. So they go out into the world not being afraid of death, not being afraid of, and so that helps them conquer everything and colonize everything. And then I think you add in the whole like scientific revolution, when all that started, I think that there was such an overvalue of the mind and a fear of intuition of indigenous cultures, that how do they know these things? How do Celtic women, what they're calling them witches? They were burning them at the stake. They were forcing them to become Christian. If you can't see, hear, touch, taste, and feel it, it's not real. So we're going to find our own myth to force onto you and say what you're doing is wrong. And then we're going to blend that with what we know about science. I think, therefore I am, that philosophy. And so I think that we started to have an overvalue of the mind and forget everything down here. And I think from that place, that's where psychology started to form. If we just get people to think differently, we'll be able to like heal them. And if we can't, then they're just very broken and they were pathologized. I think the accidental thing that happened is that neuroscience and psychology finally started merging. They were two different fields for so long. And I want to say in the past 20 or 30 years, they started coming together and working together and going, well, let's see if this is actually true, because now I can see it with an MRI. I can look and I can say, wait a second, like we just did this thing and your brain looks different. How did that happen? Where they can say two people, they're sitting in front of each other and they're talking and their brain is lighting up in the same place. Why? You mean they can actually start to mirror each other that significantly? So then that's crucial to therapy, because if someone is coming in, they are feeling you before they're thinking, even if they have thoughts that, oh, you're great, you're this, but if they don't feel comfortable, their mind and body are not in congruence, and they may be coming to you and maybe they don't feel comfortable. Maybe they're right not to feel comfortable. And they go to a therapist and they're like, but they go into their fawning, right? So now they stay in their head and they're ignoring their body. They stay with a therapist, for instance, for a while, who is like not hearing them, feels incompetent and inadequate, and is maybe scared of the client, and instead of truly surrendering to uncertainty and saying, this person has something to teach me, maybe their wisdom is stronger than my knowledge. And I think that shift probably happened a little bit because of neuroscience. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. You really described that well, that flow from the caveman to the period of science, and all of these, it was necessary. They were necessary to get where we are right now in such a short amount of time, really. When you look at the history of civilization, it was a short period of time to get from the 1600s, Immanuel Kant, to now. But I mean, there was a lot of chaos and devastation along the way, especially, I believe, with women. So many of us historically, grandmas and great grandmas and all of that, became codependent and smaller, right? The scared rabbit. You had to have your whiskers out and feel out the situation and know when to jump or know when to hide in the bush. You had to, because we are the smaller species. So until like the 60s, I believe, probably the 60s, 70s, 80s, and then, the independence of women, but we weren't really independent because we still had this mindset that we kept on. And I believe that some of us now, still today, have the mindset that we need the man's protection. We need all of that in order to be safe. And I love how you talked about way back when you became a therapist yourself, that you knew that you needed to have your own therapy. Of course we do. I look at myself and of course I do.
I think it should be mandatory. I don't think it should be, oh, well, I recommend it, because someone's life is in your hands, and they're coming to you so vulnerable.
Like we are told by the MDs, we have to stop eating certain types of food, and we need to start exercising more and stop smoking and all of that. Great, 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 great. But nobody ever says, and see a therapist at least this X no amount of time. Nobody says that. And yet we're really focused now on putting that 10,000 steps in or getting that gym membership and lifting those weights to prevent osteoporosis and all of those things. And yet mental health, it's not until most people really hit bottom. There's some kind of huge traumatic event, bankruptcy or marriage breakdown or near suicides or whatever, heavy duty addictions, that people actually start looking at their mental health and, like yourself, start working backward. Why do I continue in these patterns that I know are bad for me, and yet I get pulled back in? Well, you touched little briefly on the generational, called it cells within the cells.
Yeah. Well, so to answer what you're saying, I just wanted to piggyback on that. We've done it because we've been conditioned to do it. You know what I mean? So what you said about, well, they say go do the walks, eat the healthy food. If you think about that, it's just more steps. It's more structure, right? It's completely not seeing the invisible thing. So someone is coming to you, they have an autoimmune issue, okay, or whatever, and then you tell them, work harder. Like, that is the indirect message. You need to double down on your codependency and perfection. You just told them indirectly, and we don't see it. It's like when you start going into steps immediately before seeing the person in front of you, right? And going, I need to really just be present and witness this person and be with this person and see their inner experience and try to know and understand them. I think that is what creates this. And then when they're not seen and they don't know themselves, they can't see themselves. So they trust the authority. So let me go double down on my perfection. And it's like, no, that's the issue. Actually, you have to start with stop doing anything. Just stop. Just stop. Because I can tell you, it took me a long time in therapy to realize I was doing that. And even my therapist was reinforcing it. I had to figure that out for myself. And I had to push back on my therapist because she would be, she would tell me, and I think we do this with our clients. She would say, you're so strong. I'm so proud of you. I finally one day said, I need to know it's okay for me to be weak. I don't want praise for working even harder. I want to know that if I'm weak, that's okay. I'm still lovable. And we're missing it. And I think that until I think it was Einstein, he says, intuition is the gift and logic is its servant. We live in a society that has confused the servant for the gift. So when you're coming at it with the logic immediately, I'm not saying like eating healthy and walking and that stuff isn't great. But if your intention, you don't even know why you're doing it, you don't even know that the reason you're doing it is to be more perfect or because you're afraid of death, you need to address that first. Because if your intent is in that place, it'll be misaligned the entire time. It won't matter. And then it will just reinforce that you're defective because you failed again. So it's like this hamster and no one sees it. So, it's ironic because going back to the book that I mentioned, I've been writing a book and that's what that first book has started to become. It is all about that. It's about being, not doing. And I'm trying to be really clear at the beginning. This is not a book about 5 steps. This is not that book. And trying to help them understand this is about learning to come home to yourself, learning to be with yourself, see yourself, belong to yourself, witness yourself, because then you're going to really know yourself and you're going to have more intuitive ideas of what you need. You become the authority on you. It doesn't mean you don't use logic. Logic is the supplement. Doesn't mean you don't go to the doctor, go here and go there to check the assumptions. Does that make sense? But it's secondary. It's secondary. It's not primary. Does that make sense?
As you say, go to the doctor, ask yourself. And I'd say this to my client as well. What is this part saying? What is this thing in your throat saying to you right now? Just relax and hear it. Let it speak. Let that, whatever it is in your stomach that's causing this profound anxiety that you have, what is it saying? Put your hand on it. Allow it to speak. Because we need to start that process of trusting ourselves with the
Yes.
answer. The answer's not always out there. Let's talk to us first. It's
Yes.
not
And
crazy.
I think that we have so much wisdom and we all have that potential. We all have that potential for strong intuition. And that I think is what's scary to the colonizers.
I believe that too.
That's what's very scary. I mean, like, yeah, witches are scary if they can see you better than you can see yourself. That is a scary feeling because that is a kind of power. When you know something and they don't see it, that's scary. And, if you look at like kind of going back, there's another book, it's called Mary Magdalene Revealed. And it's so good. It's basically about the Mary Magdalene gospel, how it wasn't put in, why it wasn't put in,
Yeah.
and how there's a whole different story about her. There's a very different story. But there is something in that that she says, don't look to the left and don't look to the right. Look within. Makes sense why they wouldn't want to put that in there because that would threaten everything. It would threaten everything to say, why do you need me to go to your church? What are you so afraid of for me? You have no vested interest in me, so why are you interested in that? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely makes sense to me. It absolutely does. And I want to throw this in there because as the power of people, as the power of women, intuition, looking inward, trying to find out what's going on within ourselves, gets stronger in the world, the division gets wider. I mean, it's you against us. It's this sect of the people against this sect of the people, and it's now bad to be one or the other. So
Mhm.
if you can divide, you can conquer as well.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think that all plays into all of the things that we just talked about. So why are we not changing the system? Well, because, and we talked about it already, it's a colonial system. There's
Yeah.
there's a reason that the people in charge want the system not to change.
Yeah.
And that's my own little rant, so I'll get off that soapbox. But I mean, since we've already talked about the Mary Magdalene revealed and a few other things, I just threw that in there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're getting close to the end of our time. How can people get a hold of you? I know you're on multiple sites. You have a YouTube channel, but where else can we find you?
So my website is on-being-real.com. You can find me on Instagram, on TikTok, Substack. I think the easiest way is to probably just start with my website and they can go and they can subscribe to my blog if they're interested in getting blogs, because a lot of the concepts that I'm sharing there are things that I post on those other platforms.
Right. Yeah. And you also are in the process of writing a book.
I
Do you have
am
any idea when that's going to be out?
a couple of days ago, I woke up. It's always in the morning. I have my insights. 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, I had this idea and all these flashes kind of come, but I had this kind of realization. I was like, oh, you have another chapter you need to put in there because you don't want to put it in there. So you need to put that chapter in there. And I think it's important. This book has become two books because it was becoming something else. I'm like, these are two different topics. And I'm like, they're the same, they're different. I know we've kind of just barely touched on it, but I do believe there is generational trauma and it lives in our cells, energy, in our bones, and we carry that. And I've noticed the more brain spotting I do, the more I'm having these dreams where I'm like, that's who is that person? I had a dream in March and it was very powerful, right before I turned 50 years old. I had a dream that I was in the wilderness with these Celtic women. They were surrounding me in a circle, and they were so loving. And one of them said, scream really loud. And I didn't know why. I trusted her, but I didn't know why. And I screamed as loud as I could. And this big red bubble came out all the way around me. And she said, that's your boundary. And I said, wait, I can do that? Like that's okay? Because I've been told that you can't do that. And it was so powerful. And I'm like, that, I don't know what that was, but I got this tattoo 3 years ago intuitively. I don't know why I got it. And then I found out I'm making these connections, and I'm like, there's something I started looking in my family tree. It goes all the way back to like royalty and England and that whole area. It's Celtic, all that area. And so I have some theories around like the intergenerational trauma, epigenetics, our DNA, all of that. And so I think that has happened because I've been able to get to an even deeper layer of brain spotting. I'm probably never going to stop brain spotting because it's now becoming like an enhancement. As I move past layers, I keep going even deeper. But book 1 is, I'm hoping next year. And then book 2 will probably be maybe a year or 2 after. I'm kind of doing them together, but one is more collective, ancestral. Like this is individual, book 1. And book 2 is going to be more of how is this applicable to all of us? Like collectively, what wounds are we carrying? So that's my plan right now.
Sounds fascinating. We will interview again once your first book is out. I think that's going to be a joy. And so, what's your last message of hope for our viewers?
Oh, it's pressure. I think, I think it's just really simple. Like, start working towards learning to trust yourself. Just start really small, like with very little things, learning to say no, seeing how not so much they respond but that you're still standing afterwards. Little ways of putting yourself out there without being attached to the outcome. Because if people really want freedom, they have to kind of let go of the outcome because we're not in control of how people experience us. We can only know what our intention is. We can be kind about it, but that doesn't mean that they're going to experience it that way. So, and I think that's really important for people who are codependent, especially.
Right.
That self-trust.
Right. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Allison. It's been a pleasure. I've learned so much. I've got a ton of new books that I'm going to be reading. There's tons of stuff that you've given us and your own experiences too. I thank you for sharing all of that hard stuff, right? The hard stuff that you did share. So thank you again for being here. And thank you to you all for listening and viewing. For those of you that aren't a subscriber, please subscribe. It helps me to get the word of hope out. You will have a message of hope in your inbox every week of wonderful people such as Allison who have really thought things through and have spent their whole lifetime trying to help others through what continues to be a challenge for them. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This podcast and Inspired Healing Hypnotherapy do not provide medical advice. The information included here is not limited to text, graphics, images, or other material contained, and are for informational purposes only. No material in this podcast is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment, and before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this site.